Brandon Duhaime showed a little bit of his versatility last year, bouncing up and down the lineup. Will that carry over into this year? We discuss on today's episode of Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning in to Locked On Wild, we're glad to have you and hope that you stick with us through the rest of the offseason. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new content throughout the week. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. You can head to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat with any order. You won't want to take Bird Dogs off. We can promise you that. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we run through season expectations for Brandon Duhaime as we continue with the fourth line. We'll take a look at potential stats as well as what we need from Duhaime throughout the course of the year. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and getting to the favorite player of Locked On Wild, that of course being Brandon Duhaime. Just what we need, what we expect, what we hope to see from Dewey 1 throughout the course of the season this year. It was an injury-shortened season for Duhaime this past year as he played in 51 games, recorded 9 goals, a career high, had 1 assist, which was just an odd number. Odd to finish the season with 1 assist. He had 10 total points, was a +6, 42 penalty minutes, had 1 shorthanded goal, and shot 11.3% on the season in 80 shots, which was an improvement over last year. Saw his ice time rise to 10 minutes, 45 seconds per night. Also contributed 18 blocks, 146 hits, 19 takeaways, and 10 giveaways. So let's look at some of the good to start off. Duhaime is a player who is very responsible with the puck and is also learning some responsibility on the ice as well. The penalties is the big one that stands out for me. Obviously, in his rookie season 2 years ago, had 122 penalty minutes in 80 games. Now, 12 majors in that time of the 35 penalties that he took. But this past season, 15 total penalties. 4 of those were majors. So ended up with 11 minor penalties in 51 games. And so this is something we've talked about with Duhaime over the last couple of seasons is he's becoming a player who knows how to use his body and is learning how to be physical while also not being reckless, and did a good job of that this past season. He had a career high in terms of hits per game compared to what he was able to do the previous season. And so cutting down on the penalties, keeping the hits at a level that continues to raise, all good things. And again, 10 giveaways in 51 games. That is all very, very good. We also saw a lot of versatility with Duhaime this past season. He played, I think, on pretty much every line throughout the course of the lineup, especially after he came back and the Wild navigated other injuries. He played on the third line. He played on the second line. He played on the top line. And Duhaime has some characteristics that just translate, it seems like, no matter where he plays in the lineup. He is a player who plays hard every time he's on the ice. So you're going to get good effort no matter what is going on around him on the ice. And that hustle leads to just visually his body of work looking really good while he's out there on the ice. It also doesn't hurt that he has a lot of good speed that he utilizes as well, but It's the things too that don't show up in the stats. I think of, for instance, the Nashville game at the end of the season, not at Nashville, the one that was at the Xcel Energy Center. There were a handful of opportunities, I think 4 that I noted specifically up from the press box, in which he came in for a shift and beat a Predators player to the puck along the boards, or just came flying in off the bench and used his speed and just simply wanted it more than other players that were out on the ice, whether it be battling for a puck or getting to a puck before somebody else does to be able to set up an opportunity for a shot. It's not an accident that a lot of the line combinations that included Brandon Duhaime had really good Corsi numbers associated with them, because he's battling on the boards. He's not afraid to do that, despite not being as big as some other players that this team has had in previous seasons, who we would have liked to have seen do that more. He's not afraid to battle along the boards for the puck. He's not afraid to throw his body weight around. And so it just leads to a lot of instances in which he is able to help his teammates keep possession alive and to help sustain zone time while maybe not translating to goals. There's another instance in which I forget the opponent, but he stuck his stick out about as far as he possibly could to prevent a clearing attempt by the opponent and kept the zone alive and allowed for the Wild to try to get a couple of other opportunities on the ice. And yeah, it really only matters if a goal is scored. But think about it this way. The more instances in which you're able to sustain zone time leads to additional shots. And those couple of additional shots may be the difference between you wearing a goalie down enough to where you're able to sneak one through, or to where you don't challenge them enough and you end up coming up on the losing end. So those hustle effort plays combined with that speed just makes him really appealing to be put really anywhere in the lineup. And it is a shame that it didn't translate to more goals, because I think we could have been looking at a little bigger opportunity for Duhaime for this upcoming season. But it should be a fun matchup to have him with Pat Maroon and Connor Dewar on the fourth line, at least to start, just to see how much that combo can gel as the season goes along. So all in all, a good season last year, really good underlying numbers too for what Duhaime was able to do. And now with him under contract for this season and with the opportunity to potentially cash in on the free agent market for this upcoming offseason, it's time for a little bit further of a step up for Duhaime. And so we will see how that plays out, and we'll lay some of that down in our expectations at the end of the show. But all in all, a good season for Brandon Duhaime. Now, what would that look like statistically for Dewey 1 in this upcoming season? We'll take a look at some of the stats and where we expect Dewey 1 to land with them. That's coming up after this here on Locked on Wild. Guys, I'm not going to lie. I get a little irritated by your standard run-of-the-mill shorts, especially in the summer. They're not comfortable, they're restrictive, and a lot of times they just are too hot to wear during those heated summer days. Well, Bird Dogs is here to help, and Bird Dogs can help you look good and feel good with their stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. They do the exact same thing as Lululemon or those other big name brands, but they fit way better and keep you cool thanks to anti-sweat wicking fabric that helps you stay dry all day long. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat with your order. So when you head to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL and order a pair, better yet, order two, and enter the promo code LockedOnNHL, you'll get a free white tech hat with your order. Again, that's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl or enter promo code LockedOnNHL on your order. Word of warning, though, when you get your first pair of Bird Dogs, I promise you, you're not going to want to take them off. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will continue our chat on the fourth line as we will look at Pat Maroon's expectations for the upcoming season. And we're also going to rank where the fourth line sits amongst other fourth lines in the NHL. So stay tuned for that on tomorrow's show, and make sure that you turn notifications on so you don't miss out when tomorrow's episode drops. So let's look at some statistics for Brandon Duhaime as we get things set for the 2023-2024 season. And we talked about these statistics: 9 goals, 1 assist, 10 total points in 51 games. Well, let's set the over-under on games first. Duhaime played in 51 games this season, and he missed time due to a couple of different things. Concussion was one of them, and then also missed time at the beginning of the season as well. And so the optimist in me is going to say that he plays over 51 games this season, and just is, I think, a huge part of the fourth line success, because the one area that we saw him crack down on is the fights, and the fights have been one of the factors that have aggravated some of his concussion issues. And so if he cuts down on those, the hope is that he won't have as many reoccurrences to where he's able to stay in the lineup and contribute on a nightly basis. Beyond that, he really hasn't dealt with a lot of physical injuries up until this past season. So I feel good about the over there, and I feel good about him playing close to somewhere between 70 and 82 games, which leads you to believe that a lot of his numbers are going to increase with that additional playing time. We're going to leave goals for a minute, but I want to go to a couple of other categories as well. Let's talk about hits. So 146 hits in 51 games. And I feel like we have another 200 hit season on the way from Duhaime, especially with Pat Maroon on that fourth line as well. Those two guys, that hitting energy kind of feeds off of other players that are doing the same thing. And I just have a good feeling about this fourth line being able to create some chaos and some psychotic energy in a good way for this upcoming season. So I'm going to say way over on 146 hits. And I think Duhaime does a good job of becoming one of those more physical players and potentially taking over for one of the Wild's more physical players starting next season. As far as takeaways and giveaways go, it's a little hard to put that into an over or under because, honestly, there are a lot of different factors that come into play there, depending on who your teammates are on your various lines. So let's go to goals. And 9 goals for Duhaime in 51 games. A lot of them were in short order as he came into the game to try to kind of inject a spark into what the Wild are doing. And so with that fact, and also the fact that if anybody else gets injured higher up in the lineup, he seems like the logical successor to bump up to fill in on either the third, the second. I don't know about the top line, depending on who's out, but at least the third for sure, and possibly the second line as well. Depending on what injury is sustained and who gets hurt. But he's a logical one of these successors to bump up in the lineup with his speed and with his ability to win battles on the edges. So I feel like we're going to see an over on the 9 goals because, again, more games, He took advantage of a lot of opportunities this season, and I think we're going to see more of that here this year, which is going to lead to semi of a breakout season for Dewey 1, again, with him right on the brink of unrestricted free agency, which kind of worries me. Now, as far as total points go, with 10, I'm taking the over there too, because if you get double-digit goals, you beat 10 points. So I'm going to take the over there as well. But all in all, it just leads to a feeling, I think, of confidence that Dewey 1 is going to have a very solid season for Minnesota here this year. And let's take the over as well, as a guy who has seen his dependability on the penalty kill increase, especially in spurts throughout the year, and is a very viable player on that unit. And so let's not discount the fact that we could see a lot of him there in tandem with Connor Dewar, maybe not at the same time, but seeing both of those guys contribute to the special teams unit. Let's count the over in terms of appearances there as well. And I mean, obviously penalties, you would assume that 15 total in 51 games, you would assume to take the over there. But I think we see a third straight year of decline for Duhaime in the penalty department. And so I'm actually going to take the under in terms of total penalties of 15 for the season, even with playing in more games this year than he did last year. I think we're just seeing a guy who understands what he can and can't do. And yes, there are going to be some things that you get called for that you don't disagree with, that you don't agree with. We just don't see him commit a lot of bad penalties compared to some of the other players on the team who get called for holds and hooks and things along that nature. He's just not somebody that does those types of things while he's out there on the ice. So all of that culminates in what should be a fine season for Brandon Duhaime here in 2023-2024. Now, what do we need from Duhaime for this season? Well, that's an interesting question, and we'll answer it as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, make sure you stick with us as we continue with Locked On Wild Boot Camp. We move up to the third line next week, and that will start on Monday with Alex McLetty joining us for some expectations for the Wild third line, and we'll include Marco Rossi in a lot of these conversations as well. Not necessarily set in stone that he plays on that third line, but it sure seems like that's how it's going to play out. So we'll lay that out as well throughout the course of next week also. Getting back to Brandon Duhaime, what do we need from Duhaime over the course of this season? Well, let's start with the first thing, and I think the most important thing that he brings to the team is a clear spark when he's out on the ice. And so let's keep that rolling here this season. When Duhaime comes into the lineup, plays with that high motor, generates some high energy from his teammates while he's out there, because there are a lot of times during a game, a lot of times during the season, and it seemed like there were plenty this past year where the Wild just didn't look like they had it in a particular game. And all of a sudden you flip that fourth line in, or that third line, or whatever line Duhaime is in. He comes in, flies at somebody, lays a hit, or steals the puck away and fires a shot on net in very quick order to just get everything back in a row for the Wild. And so above all else, we need that spark and that spark plug mentality for this season for the Wild. The hope is that offensively this team does better this year than they did this past season, but there are going to be times where things just don't come easily. And so having somebody that can come in and kind of get everybody energized and back into it is a big thing to be able to say about a bottom six guy. Another thing is the versatility. Again, just like we saw last year, you've got guys on the third line like Marcus Foligno, who is getting older and has gone through some injuries. Marcus Johansson, a guy in the second line who has dealt with some injuries himself. And you're going to deal with injuries as a team throughout the course of the season. And with limited funds for the entirety of the season, it's going to be tricky for the Wild to navigate injuries depending on their severity. I mean, if it's a long term, if somebody gets hurt for a long portion of the season, you would hope that they just get put on long-term injured reserve, like Tampa Bay uses or like the Vegas Golden Knights have used, something along those lines to just give a little breathing room. But if somebody's out for a game or two and the Wilds are playing on the road, for instance, where yes, you'll bring somebody with as an extra body, but let's say you bring somebody like, I'm just going to use, I don't believe he's with Iowa anymore, Joseph Cramarosa as an example. Let's say you bring him with on a road trip. He clearly is a fourth line guy if he plays. And so then somebody elevates. And Brandon Duhaime, I think, is the best candidate for that position. So versatility and the ability to just mesh with a bunch of different lines, doing a bunch of different things is another huge piece that Duhaime adds to the game and something that is going to be critical for him to be able to assist this team with throughout the course of the season. I would like to see as well a continued growth and development in assisting with special teams, because younger players with more speed are just way more appealing, especially in a penalty kill situation, than older vets who aren't able to get to a spot in the same fashion as which they previously were able to. So having a player who can use that quickness, especially in the tight parameters of penalty kill, I'd love to see a little more usage from Duhaime in that capacity throughout the course of this season as well. So the main ones: spark plug mentality, versatility, and special teams assist. Special teams ability for Duhaime for this season. So those are the big ones. Beyond that, I mean, just continuing to be mindful of being physical out there while also staying within yourself. Did a good job of that this past season, like I said, and let's just hope that that continues. Because again, I can't, as host of this show, I can't speak highly enough of what he does on the ice. And yeah, people probably listening to this who don't follow this team a ton or who don't follow the show a ton are probably saying, the bottom six guy, who cares? Well, in reality, the way that he plays the game and the hard work never ceasing is the thing that is the most appealing, I think, is going out there every shift and just giving it everything that you've got, whether you're out there for 50 seconds or a minute, 50 seconds. And there just does not seem to ever be enough of that on the team. Whether you are one of the most talented players in the league, or you're a guy fighting for one of those final spots, or even just to be that 13th forward. There just doesn't seem to be enough of that in the NHL, of those guys who just are willing to outwork whoever they go against. And so that is why we continue to reap the praises of Brandon Duhaime and what he does for this team in a bottom six role. So that's what we're looking for. That's what we're hoping for this year. And hopefully for Dewey One, he is able to achieve all of that in a very successful season, so that he can then set himself up for a nice little long-term contract either here or elsewhere. That'll do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Thank you once again for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, if this is your first time tuning in, make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the course of the week. If you are one of the everydayers who tunes into the show each and every day, we are glad to have you back once again. Let's get the conversation going in the YouTube comments. We always appreciate getting those discussions going. So make sure that you let your voice be heard. Agree or disagree with what we talked about here today. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.